Leah, we need to go, now. Alex stood by the door, one shoe on, one shoe off. His phone buzzed on the counter, a jittery reminder of his mother's panicked voice moments earlier. Did she say what happened? I asked, rushing to grab my keys. No, just that everything's out on the lawn and she needs us. Sound it off, Leah. Really off. We sped through the quiet streets, my heart drumming in sync with the pulsing engine. Ruth had always been a strong woman, not the sort to easily panic. My fingers tightened around the wheel, my mind racing. When we pulled up to the house, the scene was jarring. Ruth's belongings were strewn across the yard. Old photo albums lay open, pages fluttering in the breeze. Furniture was haphazardly arranged, and Ruth sat on the porch, a calm smile on her face. It didn't fit. Mom? Alex rushed forward. What happened? Are you okay? Ruth looked up, her eyes twinkling with something I couldn't quite place. They think they've outsmarted me. Little do they know, their game has just begun. Alex and I exchanged a worried glance. What do you mean? Who did this? Ruth patted the space beside her, inviting us to sit. Sebastian and Trina. They want control, but I'm not so easily fooled. The weight of her words hung in the air. We had known Sebastian and Trina were ambitious, but this was beyond anything we imagined. Leah, they left her here, just abandoned her. Alex's voice cracked with frustration. Mom, you need to come with us. It's wrong. We can't just leave you here. Ruth nodded, standing up with a grace that belied her age. Let's gather what we can. The rest can wait. As we packed up Ruth's life, she seemed oddly composed. Alex kept shaking his head, eyes clouded with confusion. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Ruth's cryptic comment about the game had unsettled me deeply. Back at our place, we settled Ruth into the guest room. Alex and I sat in the kitchen, the silence stretching between us. Finally, he broke it. She said, "Their game has just begun, Leah." What does she mean? I shrugged, feeling the same unease. I don't know, but we need to find out. Ruth's presence changed the dynamic of our home completely. She acted as though nothing unusual had happened, her demeanor eerily serene. Over dinner, she was her usual bright self, discussing mundane things like the weather and neighborhood gossip. It was only later, as I watched her from the doorway of her room, that I caught a fleeting glimpse of something cold and calculating in her eyes. It disappeared almost as soon as it appeared. The next morning, Alex and I sat sipping coffee, our thoughts clearly on the same track. We need to talk to Sebastian and Trina, I suggested. Agreed, but let's do it carefully. They won't confess easily. Leah, I just want a family that's close. I thought moving back here would bring us together. His voice was laced with disappointment. I reached out, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. We'll figure this out. We will. Days turned into a blur of whispered conversations and silent tensions. Alex set up a meeting with Sebastian. Meanwhile, Ruth continued her cryptic hints, always stopping just short of revealing her full hand. One night, as I walked past Ruth's room, I heard her murmur, "The pawns are in place." Yet my blood ran cold. Something serious was unfolding, and we were right in the middle of it. As we prepared to face Sebastian, a mixture of dread and determination settled in my chest. This wasn't just about Ruth anymore. It was about uncovering the truth, protecting our family, and maybe playing a game we hadn't known we'd entered. And I was ready to win. Sitting across from Sebastian was like confronting a glacier, cold and immovable. His eyes darted between Alex and me, a smirk playing on his lips. Trina sat beside him, flipping through her phone, acting disinterested. "So what's this about, little brother?" Sebastian finally asked, that smug grin not leaving his face. Alex clenched his fists under the table. "Mom's things were thrown out. She was scared and confused. We want to know why." Sebastian raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "Mom's condition is worsening. It's better for her to be with someone who can provide constant care." "And that someone is you?" Alex's voice dripped with sarcasm. Trina finally looked up, her expression bored. "She needs stability, Alex. Your job keeps you busy. We can provide what she needs." I felt my anger rising. Abandoning her on the porch doesn't sound like providing care. Sebastian shrugged. "She was being difficult. We had to make a point." Alex's face turned red. "A point? She's your mother." Sebastian's smirk faded, replaced by a cold glare. "Don't lecture me, Alex. I'm handling it." The tension in the room was suffocating. I realized we wouldn't get any honest answers here. Alex stood up abruptly, and I followed. "This isn't over, Sebastian," Alex said. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. "Make sure it's not. You wouldn't want to test me." As we left, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sebastian and Trina were hiding something far more sinister. They had no intention of letting Ruth regain control over her life. When we got home, Ruth was knitting in the living room, calm as ever. She glanced up at us. "How did it go?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Not well," Alex replied, dropping onto the couch. "Did you expect anything different?" Ruth's tone was light, but her eyes were sharp. We stayed silent for a moment before Ruth spoke again. "It's time you knew what Sebastian and Trina are really after." She motioned for us to sit. We listened as she began to unravel the tangled web of manipulation. Sebastian and Trina had been planning this for a long time. Ruth's assets, her will, everything was part of their strategy to secure control. "They think I'm losing my mind," Ruth said with a hint of amusement. "But I've been keeping tabs on them." "They've underestimated you," I said, admiration creeping into my voice. Ruth nodded. "Their greed will be their undoing." That night, Alex and I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. "We need a plan," he said quietly. I turned to him. "We need to protect her and expose them." In the following days, we set our plan into motion. Ruth handed over documents, receipts, anything that tracked Sebastian and Trina's moves. Every revelation fueled our resolve. One evening, our doorbell rang. It was Trina, holding a box of Ruth's things. "Mom left these at the house," she said sweetly. "She's not your responsibility anymore," Alex snapped. Trina's eyes glinted. "We'll see about that." As she left, I exchanged a look with Alex. The battle lines were drawn. Their game was cruel, but we were ready to fight back. Ruth's quiet strength bolstered our determination. We'd protect her from this twisted game and bring Sebastian and Trina's plans crashing down. The stakes were high, but like Ruth said, it was they who had miscalculated. Every weekend, Alex and I visited Ruth at Sebastian's house. Each time, the hostility from Sebastian and Trina was palpable. One Saturday, we found Ruth alone in the living room, gazing absently out the window. "Hi, Mom," Alex said gently. She turned, smiling. "Hello, dear. Leah." Sebastian entered, his face darkening at our presence. "You're early." "We wanted to spend some time with Mom," I said, matching his cold stare. "Don't mind us," Alex added. "We'll just be a while." Sebastian scoffed. "Make it quick. Trina and I have plans." We exchanged a look with Ruth, her eyes calm but aware. We sat and chatted, trying to ignore Sebastian's hovering presence. After a while, Ruth's gaze drifted to her eldest son. "Sebastian, why don't you join us?" His sneer was immediate. "I have better things to do than listen to family trivia." "Like plotting against Mom?" Alex shot back. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Alex." Ruth's hand on Alex's arm was the only thing that kept him from saying more. "Let's not quarrel," she said softly. He bit his lip, but stayed silent. Ruth turned to me, her eyes asking 1,000 questions. I forced a smile. "It's just frustrating seeing how you're treated." "Leah," she said, her voice firm, "we'll handle it." Sebastian's phone buzzed, breaking the tension. "Mom, Trina and I are taking over your care. It's obvious you can't live alone anymore." Ruth's composed mask didn't slip. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" Sebastian shrugged. "You'll be moving in with us permanently." My jaw dropped. "Without discussing it?" "She's not in any state to argue," he replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Ruth's eyes locked on mine. "We'll see." The atmosphere was heavy as we left. Back home, Alex punched a wall in frustration. "He's manipulating everything. We can't let him do this." "We won't," I promised, "but we need evidence." The following weeks, we documented every interaction, every comment. Ruth's clarity in those moments was undeniable. She played along, giving just enough to keep Sebastian and Trina at bay. One afternoon, while Ruth and I sat in the garden, she spoke quietly. "They're convinced they've won, but every pawn they move brings them closer to their downfall." Alex joined us, bringing his laptop. "Look at this. Mom, did you sign any documents recently?" Her eyes flickered with a hint of triumph. "Sebastian tried to force my hand. I signed nothing of importance." "That's crucial," Alex said, showing us forged papers. "They're trying to make it look like you did." Ruth's smile was frightfully serene. "They'll regret underestimating me." Days later, I overheard Sebastian and Trina conspiring. "Once she's declared unfit, everything's ours," Trina whispered. Sebastian smirked. "It's only a matter of time." I recorded their conversation, my heart pounding. Our proof was building, and with it, our resolve. The next family dinner, Ruth was the picture of serenity. Mid-conversation, she casually dropped, "I'll be making some changes to my will." Sebastian's fork clattered to his plate. "What changes?" Ruth smiled sweetly. "To protect myself from unforeseen circumstances." "You can't do that," Trina snapped, panic edging her voice. "Oh, but I can," Ruth replied, "and I will." The dinner ended in frosty silence, but we knew we had them on edge now. That night, Alex and I stayed up late, plans unfurling between us. Ruth wasn't alone in her fight. We were a team, and we aimed to expose every deceit, every betrayal. The game was far from over. Ruth's resilience and cunning fortified our resolve. Sebastian and Trina might have started this, but we intended to finish it. Days turned into weeks, and each visit to Sebastian's felt like stepping into enemy territory. Ruth remained a calm force, but the tension was suffocating. Her serene demeanor only seemed to infuriate Sebastian and Trina more. One humid Saturday afternoon, Alex and I were sorting through some of Ruth's papers in the guest room when we heard raised voices downstairs. We hurried to find Ruth and Sebastian in a heated argument. "You can't just take over my life, Sebastian!" Ruth's voice was trembling but firm. "You're not thinking straight, Mom. This is for your own good," Sebastian snarled, his face a mask of frustration. Alex stepped between them. "Stop this, Sebastian. She's not incapable. You have no right." Trina appeared out of nowhere, her face twisted with a mean smile. "You're fighting a losing battle, Alex. Just accept it." "No," Alex shot back. "We're not giving up on Mom." Ruth's eyes met mine with a silent resolve, then turned back to Sebastian. "I may be getting old, but I'm not blind to your intentions." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "You'll regret standing against us." Later that night, as we prepared to leave, Ruth pulled us aside. "I overheard them talking," she whispered, her expression more serious than usual. "What did they say?" I asked, heart pounding. "They plan to get me declared mentally unfit. They need the control." Alex's eyes widened. "How can they do that?" Now Ruth's smile was grim. "They've already got a doctor who'll back their claim." "Then we need to act fast," I said. "We need more evidence." The days that followed were filled with a quiet, simmering tension. Ruth continued to play her role, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Still, she never wavered. One evening, Alex and I decided to pay a surprise visit. We arrived to find Ruth sitting quietly in the living room, her usually neat hair slightly disheveled. She motioned us to sit. "Listen carefully," she said softly. "I've learned they plan to have me moved to a facility." "What?" Alex's voice was loud, his eyes wide with disbelief. "It's happening soon," Ruth continued. "Sebastian wants to make it look like I can't live at home anymore." Trina suddenly appeared, her eyes narrowing as she noticed us. "What are you doing here?" "We needed to talk to Mom," I said calmly. Trina didn't bother to hide her contempt. "You're meddling where you don't belong. It's too late to save her." Ruth stood up slowly, her eyes never leaving Trina's. "This isn't over." Trina smirked. "It will be soon." We left with a fierce determination burning in our chests. At home, we gathered everything we had. The recordings, the forged documents, every piece of the puzzle that showed Sebastian and Trina's plans. The next morning, we confronted Sebastian and Trina in Ruth's living room. Alex held up a stack of papers. "We know what you've been doing, and we have proof." Sebastian's face went white, but he quickly masked it with anger. "Get out. This isn't your business." "It's very much our business," I said, stepping closer. "We won't let you do this." Trina's eyes flared with anger. "You have no idea what you're up against." Ruth's voice cut through the tension. "Neither do you." That's when I noticed the flicker of doubt in their eyes. They sensed the tide turning. We left them in a stunned silence, our mission clear. Protect Ruth at all costs and bring their schemes into the light. As we walked away, the weight of the conflict didn't seem so crushing anymore. For the first time, we felt hope. The battle wasn't over, but we were prepared for whatever came next. Ruth's strength fortified us, and together we would dismantle the sinister game piece by piece. The following week, our tense standoff with Sebastian and Trina escalated rapidly. Secrets and lies clashed with our determination to protect Ruth. One rainy afternoon, I decided to sneak into Sebastian's office while he was out. The room reeked of arrogance, with its dark, imposing furniture and meticulously organized documents. My hands shook slightly as I rifled through drawers. Footsteps in the hallway made my heart race. I ducked behind the heavy curtains just as Trina entered. She was on the phone, her voice sharp and hushed. "The doctor will declare her unfit by Friday. Make sure the papers are ready. Once that's secure, we'll transfer everything into our names." Recordings. I fumbled with my phone, pressing record as fast as I could, capturing her malicious plan. Our proof was growing stronger by the minute. After Trina left, I carefully placed everything back in its place and slipped out of the office, heart pounding. As Alex drove us home, we replayed the recording. Each word filled us with a fresh wave of anger. "We've got them now," Alex said, gripping the wheel. "This proves everything." The next day, Ruth asked to be taken to a familiar park. We walked through the quiet paths, the sun casting long, comforting shadows. Her eyes were alert, yet her silence indicated contemplation. "They've put their pieces on the board," she finally said. "It's time for us to make our move." Alex nodded. "We're ready. We have enough to take to the attorney." That evening, we prepared the documents and recordings, carefully organizing them to present a compelling case. Each file was another nail in Sebastian and Trina's coffin. The confrontation came sooner than expected. On Friday morning, we received a call. "Mom's gone." Alex's voice was frantic. "They've taken her." I swallowed a rising panic. "Where?" "I don't know. They're not answering." We drove to Sebastian's house, a firestorm of urgency fueling us. Upon arrival, we found the house empty, echoing with a disturbing silence. Panic turned to grim resolve. "Check the study," Alex urged. "There might be clues." In Sebastian's office, we found an itinerary for a private clinic. I snapped a picture and raced back to Alex. "This must be where they took her." "We're bringing her back," Alex said, his voice steely with determination. We reached the clinic in record time. As we barged in, Sebastian met us at the door, fury blazing in his eyes. "You're not supposed to be here, and you're not supposed to kidnap our mother," Alex shouted. Trina stood beside him, smug and defiant. "We have every right. She's unfit." Ruth's voice broke through the commotion. "Funny, considering you needed to forge documents to prove it." Alex stepped forward. "We have recordings of your plans, your threats. It's over, Sebastian." Sebastian's expression flickered with doubt, but quickly hardened into a sneer. "You have nothing." "We'll see about that," Alex replied, holding up his phone. "We're taking this to the authorities." Trina's confidence crumbled as the reality of their situation hit her. "This isn't over," she screamed, but her voice lacked conviction. We escorted Ruth out, her demeanor calm, but her eyes blazing with triumph. On the drive home, she said, "They underestimated us." "That was their first mistake," I replied, glancing at Alex, who squeezed my hand. At home, we sat around the dining table, a quiet victory settling over us. Ruth's strength had been our guide, her resilience our beacon. Sebastian and Trina's vile nature had been their undoing, and with every piece of evidence, we moved closer to justice. We knew the battle wasn't entirely over, but we stood united, ready for whatever came next. Ruth smiled at us, her eyes full of pride. They thought they outsmarted us, but they were playing my game all along. And in that moment, I felt it in my bones. This family was stronger than their deceit, and together we would ensure that justice was served. The following Monday, we gathered our evidence and headed to our attorney's office. The weight of everything we'd collected bore down on us, but Ruth's presence steeled our resolve. Mr. Harris, our attorney, scanned through the documents and recordings with growing astonishment. "This is damning evidence," he said finally. "It's more than enough to take to the authorities." Ruth nodded firmly. "It's time we put an end to their schemes." We left Mr. Harris's office with a sense of guarded triumph. Now the battle was in the hands of the legal system. Our job wasn't finished, but we had struck a decisive blow. Back at home, Ruth shared a quiet moment with Alex and me. "Thank you for standing by me," she said softly. "This wouldn't have been possible without you." "We're a family," Alex replied. "That's what we do." A week later, the police arrived at Sebastian's house. We watched from a distance as officers escorted him and Trina into custody. The sight was surreal, the culmination of all our efforts, finally taking tangible form. "That's just the beginning," Ruth said, watching them being driven away. "Their reckoning is far from over." Later that evening, Ruth invited us to join her in the living room. "There's something you need to know," she said, motioning us to sit. She began recounting the moments she had overheard Sebastian and Trina's plans. It was clear from the start, they didn't just want control, they wanted everything. As she spoke, a chilling determination underscored her words. I decided to pretend, to play into their perceptions. Being underestimated gave me the upper hand. You were brilliant, Mom, Alex said, admiration evident in his voice. Thank you, she replied. But the fight's not over yet. We have to see this through. The true extent of Ruth's cunning became clear when she revealed her final move. I moved my assets into a trust managed by Leah before their plans could take hold. My breath caught. You trusted me with everything? Ruth's eyes softened. You've always had a good heart, Leah. I knew you would protect my legacy. The next few days were a whirlwind. The scandal of Sebastian and Trina's arrest reverberated through the community, disgracing them publicly. Every news outlet carried the story of their attempt to manipulate and defraud their own mother. One evening, a knock at the door revealed an officer with more news. Sebastian and Trina are being charged with elder abuse and fraud. Their trial is set for next month. Alex and I shared a look of relief. Finally, justice was within reach. Ruth's eyes sparkled with a renewed vigor. We'll be there to see it happen. The weeks leading up to the trial were tense, but Ruth's strength anchored us. She remained steadfast, her resolve unwavering. And when the day of the trial arrived, we walked into the courtroom as a united front. Sebastian and Trina looked defeated, far removed from their former arrogance. The evidence we provided painted a damning picture, and their defense crumbled under the weight of their deceit. Ruth took the stand, her testimony a powerful testament to her resilience. I am not a pawn in their game. I am my own person, and I will not be controlled. The verdict was clear and just, guilty on all counts. Outside the courthouse, the reality of our victory settled in. Ruth turned to us, her eyes filled with gratitude. We did it. No, Mom, Alex corrected gently. You did it. We just followed your lead. Ruth's smile was a beacon of the strength and love that had carried us through. This family is stronger together. They underestimated that, and it was their downfall. As we drove home, a sense of closure enveloped us. Ruth's cleverness and our unity had triumphed over deceit and greed. The battle had been long and arduous, but we emerged stronger, bound by the love and determination that made us a family. After the trial, a tense quiet settled over our lives. But beneath the calm surface, we knew the battle wasn't truly over. Sebastian and Trina might be facing jail time, but there were still loose ends to tie up. One evening, Ruth gathered us in the living room. There's something more you need to know, she said. Her eyes twinkled with a mischievous glint I hadn't seen before. What is it, Mom? Alex asked, curiosity piqued. Ruth looked at us with a sly smile. I've been planning one last move. Sebastian and Trina think they've hit rock bottom, but they haven't seen anything yet. I blinked in surprise. What do you mean? Ruth leaned back in her chair, her demeanor confident. Their house, their cars, everything they've accumulated using my money, I've already started the process to have it all seized. They'll have nothing left, Alex said, understanding dawning on his face. Ruth nodded. Exactly. They need to understand the full consequences of their actions. The next day, we worked with the attorneys to expedite the process. The legal wheels turned swiftly, and soon enough the foreclosure notices were delivered. Facing both incarceration and financial ruin, Sebastian and Trina were left reeling. A week later, we visited the house one last time. The once intimidating mansion now stood eerily quiet, stripped of its former grandeur. Sebastian and Trina were there, gathering their remaining belongings. As we approached, Sebastian's face twisted with anger. You've taken everything from us. No, Ruth corrected calmly. You did that to yourselves. Trina's face was a mask of hatred. You think you've won, don't you? Yes, Ruth said simply. Not because of what I've taken, but because of what I've protected. Sebastian lunged forward, but the presence of our attorney and a couple of officers kept him at bay. This isn't over, he spat. Actually, it is, Alex said, stepping between us and Sebastian. For you, it's all over. We walked away from the scene knowing that Sebastian and Trina's downfall was complete. Ruth's resolve and our unity had ensured they could no longer harm our family. In the days that followed, the mood in our home lifted. Ruth's trust in us had brought a new level of closeness in our family dynamic. We spent more time together, enjoying the simple moments that had once seemed elusive. One sunny afternoon, we decided to have a small celebration in the backyard. As we set up the table, Ruth smiled warmly at us. "This is what family should be," she said contentedly. Alex wrapped his arm around her shoulder. "We owe it all to you, Mom. You taught us what it means to be strong." "And clever?" I added with a grin. "Thank you, both of you," Ruth said, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. "I wouldn't have come this far without you." Under the amber glow of the setting sun, we sat around the table, toasting to our shared victory and newfound peace. It felt like the dawn of a new chapter, one free from the shadows of betrayal. But as we basked in our moment of happiness, a slight worry tugged at the back of my mind. Would Sebastian and Trina truly give up? Had we really seen the last of their vile nature? Only time would tell. For now, though, we chose to live in the present, cherishing the harmony we had fought so hard to reclaim. Ruth's wisdom and courage had taught us that family wasn't just about blood. It was about standing up for each other, no matter the cost. In the end, Ruth's gambit had outsmarted the most cunning adversaries. It had shown us the true strength of our bonds and the importance of justice. And for that, we were eternally grateful. A month had passed since the trial, and life had settled into a new, comforting rhythm. Ruth now lived with us, her presence a constant source of strength and warmth. We all did our best to put the turbulent past behind us, though at times it cast long shadows over our days. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, a knock at the door shattered our peace. Alex went to answer it, and moments later he returned with a letter in his hand, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "It's from Sebastian," he said, handing me the envelope. A chill ran down my spine as I opened it and began to read. "Dear Alex, it seems you and your beloved Leah have won this round. Enjoy your victory while it lasts. Just remember, a cornered animal is the most dangerous. We will be back." I looked at Ruth, who sat calmly awaiting our reaction. "He's threatening us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ruth sighed, her eyes reflecting a mix of annoyance and resolve. "Let them try. We're ready for whatever comes next." True to Ruth's spirit, we continued to live our lives, not allowing Sebastian's ominous message to shake us. We fortified our defenses, both legally and emotionally. Our unity was our strength, and we knew he couldn't break that. One afternoon, Alex and I found Ruth in the garden, tending to her beloved roses. "Mom," Alex said gently, "we need to talk about the future." Ruth looked up, her hands still covered in soil. "What's on your mind?" "We want to ensure that you're always protected," I explained. "Maybe we should formalize the trust and secure everything." Ruth wiped her hands on a cloth and stood up, her expression thoughtful. "You're right. It's time to take the final steps." In the days that followed, we worked with Mr. Harris to solidify Ruth's assets into an irrevocable trust. Each signature and sealed document felt like another layer of protection forming around her, around us. One evening, while we were finalizing the papers, Ruth paused, looking over the documents. "This isn't just about protecting me, you know," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "It's about protecting what's right, ensuring that deceit never wins." We nodded, understanding and appreciating the gravity of her words. Weeks passed, and the threat from Sebastian faded into a distant memory, though we remained vigilant. As summer gave way to autumn, our new life with Ruth felt more natural, a testament to the resilience we all shared. One crisp autumn morning, Ruth called us into the living room. There, she sat with an old, weathered book on her lap. "I want to read you something," she said, opening the book. Her voice filled the room as she recited a passage about justice, love, and the unbreakable bonds of family. "This is what you've given me," she said, closing the book and looking at us with glistening eyes. "A family that stands together, even in the face of adversity." Alex hugged her tight, his voice thick with emotion. "We wouldn't be here without you, Mom. You showed us what it means to truly fight for each other." Ruth smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "And you showed me what it means to be truly loved and protected." As we sat there, wrapped in the warmth of each other's presence, I realized that this was the true victory. Not just outsmarting Sebastian and Trina, but becoming a family in the fullest sense. We were stronger, more united, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The echoes of past conflicts faded into the background, and we embraced the harmony we had worked so hard to achieve. Ruth's wisdom and courage had led us through the darkest times, and now in the light we found peace, and in that peace we carved out a future together, one that Sebastian and Trina could never touch. Sure, but you're going to be the one stuck with those 5 kids. I'm taking the house, Daniel said, his voice dripping with a smugness that sent shivers down my spine. His words were a slap in the face, a stark reminder of how far we had drifted from the love that once seemed unbreakable. I took a deep breath, steadying my shaking hands. You think this is just about the house, Daniel? I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. What else is there, Laura? You'll crawl back eventually. You need me. That was Daniel, arrogant, dismissive, and utterly blind to the wreckage of our family that lay at his feet. Our journey together, which had begun with laughter and dreams in the corridors of college, had twisted into this bitter, unrecognizable end. You've always underestimated me, I said quietly, my mind made up. But not anymore. I'm filing for divorce, Daniel. And I'm taking the kids. His laughter was cruel, a sound that echoed in the empty spaces of our once happy home. Divorce? You think you can manage without me? Go ahead, try. But remember, I'm keeping the house, and without my money, good luck surviving. I looked into his eyes, searching for a trace of the man I had fallen in love with, but all I saw was a stranger, a cold, heartless stranger. I turned away, my heart heavy, but my decision firm. You'll see, Daniel. You'll see what life is like without us, and when you do, don't come looking for me. With those words, I left the room, leaving behind the shattered remains of what was once my life. The kids were still asleep, unaware of the storm that was about to change our lives forever. As I packed a few essentials, my mind raced with plans and possibilities. I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for the 5 beautiful reasons sleeping in their rooms. They deserved a life free from the shadow of their father's indifference and cruelty. I glanced back one last time at the home that had held so many dreams and whispered a goodbye to a past that could never be reclaimed. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, I felt a sense of freedom, tinged with fear and uncertainty. But above all, there was hope. A fragile, flickering hope that from the ashes of our broken family, something new and beautiful could arise. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to fight, ready to rebuild, and ready to show Daniel that his arrogance would be his downfall. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was the author of my own destiny. The day I met Daniel at college, he was the epitome of charm and wit. His laughter was infectious, and his promises were like a beacon of hope. We were young, in love, and naive enough to believe that love was all we needed. Fast forward to our married life, things started to change slowly yet painfully. The once attentive and caring Daniel became distant, his smiles replaced by frowns, and his warm embraces turned cold. It hit me hardest after the birth of our twins, Ellie and Ethan. I still remember holding them in my arms, their tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and looking up to see Daniel standing at the door, his expression unreadable. "Why won't you hold them?" I asked, my voice a mix of bewilderment and hope. "They are your children, Daniel." He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. I just don't know how to handle them." I tried to understand, to believe that it was just a phase, that soon he would be the doting father I had imagined he would be. But as days turned to months, the distance only grew. When I brought up the idea of having another child, hoping it might bridge the gap between us, his response was lukewarm. "Sure, if that's what you want." But it was never what he wanted, was it? The man who once dreamed of a big, happy family was now a shadow of his former self, buried under excuses and avoidance. Our life became a cycle of unmet expectations and silent dinners. The laughter and love that once filled our home were replaced by a deafening silence, broken only by the children's laughter, a sound that seemed to alienate Daniel even more. "Why don't you spend time with the kids?" I asked one evening, my voice a mere whisper, heavy with unshed tears. He didn't even look up from his phone. "I'm busy, Laura. You know how it is." But I didn't know. I didn't understand how the man I loved could turn his back on his own flesh and blood. How he could retreat into a shell, leaving me to juggle the responsibilities of 5 young lives alone. The more I tried to reach out, the more he pulled away, burying himself in work, and on the rare occasions he was home, he was like a ghost. Present in body, but absent in every way that mattered. As I lay in bed that night, the moon casting a pale light across the room, I realized the painful truth. The Daniel I fell in love with was gone, replaced by a stranger I no longer recognized, a stranger who wore the mask of my husband but whose eyes were void of the warmth and love that had once drawn me to him. I knew then that I had to make a choice, not just for myself, but for Ellie, Ethan, and the triplets. I had to step out of the shadow of a broken marriage and into the light of a new beginning. A beginning where I was strong, independent, and free from the chains of disappointment and unfulfilled promises. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, I made a silent vow. I would not let Daniel's indifference break me. I would rise from the ashes of our failed marriage and build a life of happiness and love for my children and myself. A life where we were no longer just surviving, but thriving. Living with Daniel had become like navigating a minefield, each step uncertain and fraught with the risk of emotional detonation. The house, once a symbol of our shared dreams, had become a prison of my frustrations and his indifference. "Mom, why doesn't Daddy play with us?" Ellie's innocent question one evening cut through me. I looked into her curious eyes, her twin brother Ethan nodding along, seeking an answer I didn't have. I knelt down, enveloping them in a hug, trying to shield them from the harsh reality. "Daddy's just very busy, sweethearts. But he loves you very much," I lied, my heart aching with the falsehood. The truth was Daniel had become a stranger not only to me, but to our children as well. His presence at home was like a passing shadow, cold and fleeting. The man who once dreamt of a bustling, joyful household now seemed burdened by the very existence of his own family. Our triplets, barely 2 years old, had quickly learned to rely solely on me. The lack of paternal affection had become their normal, and it pained me to see the void in their young lives. "Daniel, you need to spend time with your children. They hardly know you," I confronted him one night, the words spilling out in a mix of frustration and desperation. He scoffed, flipping through channels on the TV. "What's the point? They have you. Isn't that enough?" His dismissive tone stung, but it was the underlying implication that wounded me deeply. In his eyes, I was just the caretaker, a background fixture in the narrative of his life. The financial strain only added to the growing chasm between us. Daniel's salary was decent, but with his increasing detachment, he became more secretive about our finances. I remember stumbling upon a credit card bill, hidden beneath a pile of papers. The numbers danced before my eyes, countless transactions, none of which were for the family. It was as if Daniel was living a separate life, one where we didn't exist. "Daniel, we need to talk about our finances. The kids' expenses are mounting, and we can't keep up like this," I said one evening, mustering all the courage I had. He barely glanced at me, his eyes glued to his phone. "Why? You managing fine, aren't you? Just cut back on whatever you're wasting money on." His words were like a slap in the face. Wasting money? On what? The children's needs? Food? The basic necessities of life? The more I tried to bridge the gap, the more he retreated into his shell, leaving me alone to bear the weight of our crumbling world. The loneliness was crushing, but it was the helplessness that consumed me. The feeling of being trapped in a loveless marriage, fighting a losing battle for the sake of my children. But amidst the despair, a fire was kindling within me, a fire of defiance, a determination to no longer be a silent sufferer in the narrative Daniel had written for us. I was ready to rewrite our story, one where the children and I were not just mere characters in the background, but the protagonists of our own lives. And as I tucked my children into bed that night, whispering stories of love and hope, I knew the time had come. The time to step out of the shadows and into the light. The time to reclaim our lives from the clutches of a man who had forgotten the meaning of family. The day I decided to break free from Daniel's grasp, I felt a mix of fear and liberation. The morning air was crisp, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere within our home. As I prepared breakfast, Daniel sauntered into the kitchen, his demeanor as cold as ever. "What's this?" he sneered, looking at the simple meal I had put together. "It's breakfast," I replied, my voice calm but firm. He scoffed, pushing the plate away. "This is what I get after working all day? You can't even cook a decent meal?" I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to retaliate. For years, I had tolerated his belittling remarks, his disregard for our family. But not anymore. Daniel, the kids need new clothes, and the school fees are due. We need to discuss our finances, I ventured, hoping for a rational conversation. He rolled his eyes, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. Your job is to take care of the house and the kids. I do my part. Don't expect more. That was the moment I realized nothing would ever change. Daniel would never see us as his priority. His family was just a burden, an inconvenience in his self-centered world. Later that day, as I watched the children play, their laughter a bittersweet sound, I knew I had to take a stand. For them, for me. Daniel, we need to talk. This can't go on, I said when he finally returned home that evening. He looked at me, a sneer forming on his lips. What now, Laura? Tired of your comfortable life? His words ignited something within me. Comfortable? You call this comfortable? Your children barely know you, and you think throwing money at us is enough? He laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Oh, please, you've had it easy. Don't start playing the victim now. His lack of empathy, his sheer arrogance was staggering. It's not about being a victim, Daniel. It's about our family. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? For a moment, he looked taken aback, as if the idea of anyone challenging him was unthinkable. You think you can manage without me? Go ahead, try, he challenged, his voice laced with contempt. I looked him in the eye, my resolve strengthening. I can, and I will. I'm filing for divorce, Daniel. I refuse to let you drag me and the children down any longer. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his usual arrogance. Divorce? Fine. But remember, I'm keeping the house, and good luck with the kids on your own. As he walked away, a sense of determination washed over me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready to fight for a better future, for a life where my children and I were more than just afterthoughts in someone else's story. I tucked the children into bed that night, their innocent faces a reminder of the battle ahead. But I was ready to break free from the chains of a loveless marriage and start anew, ready to show Daniel that his neglect and cruelty would be his undoing. The day I started the divorce proceedings, I felt a mix of trepidation and resolve. As I sat in the lawyer's office, outlining the years of neglect and emotional abandonment, the weight of my decision sank in. Mrs. Williams, we'll ensure you get what you deserve in this settlement. Your children's well-being is our priority, the lawyer assured me. I nodded, feeling a sense of empowerment. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my life. When I informed Daniel about the divorce, his reaction was predictably dismissive. Divorce? You think you can handle everything on your own? This will be amusing. His words no longer hurt me. Instead, they fueled my determination to build a better future for myself and my children. As the legal battle ensued, Daniel's true colors became even more apparent. He was more concerned about his finances and the house than the emotional trauma he had inflicted on our family. You're trying to rob me of everything, Laura. That house is mine. I worked for it, he shouted during one of our mediated sessions. I looked at him, my resolve unwavering. This isn't about the house, Daniel. It's about our children, their future. But you wouldn't understand that. The legal process was draining, both emotionally and financially. But with each passing day, my resolve strengthened. I was fighting for justice, for recognition of the years I had spent in the shadow of a man who valued his ego more than his family. During the final hearing, Daniel's arrogance was on full display. You think you've won, Laura? You'll come crawling back. You can't survive without me. But he was wrong. I had survived, and I would continue to do so. The court's judgment was in my favor, granting me custody of the children and a fair settlement. As I walked out of the courtroom, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had stood up to the man who had tried to diminish my worth, and I had emerged victorious. That evening, as I sat with my children, their laughter filling our modest but warm home, I knew I had made the right decision. We were starting a new chapter, one of hope and new beginnings. Daniel's attempts to intimidate me had failed. He had underestimated my strength, my resilience. And now, he was the one left to grapple with the consequences of his actions. I looked at my children, their faces beaming with happiness, and I knew we would be okay. We had each other, and that was all that mattered. The path to liberation had been long and fraught with challenges, but I had walked it with my head held high. And as I put my children to bed that night, I whispered a promise to them and to myself. We would never be victims of Daniel's cruelty again. We were free, and we would thrive. The days following the divorce were a blend of relief and rebuilding. My sister Emily became my rock during this tumultuous time. Moving in with her was a decision born out of necessity, but it blossomed into a period of healing and growth for me and the children. "Laura, you're stronger than you realize," Emily said one evening as we sat in her cozy living room, the kids asleep in the next room. Her words were a balm to my weary soul. "I had to be for the kids," I replied, my voice tinged with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. The practical aspects of starting over were daunting. The financial settlement from the divorce was a relief, but it was the emotional scars that were harder to heal. Emily's support was invaluable. She was more than just a sister. She was a mentor, a friend. Daniel's absence became more pronounced in the kids' lives, but we filled the void with love and laughter. Emily's bond with the children grew each day, her natural maternal instinct a comfort to their wounded hearts. I found a job at a local library, a place that offered not just employment, but a sanctuary of sorts. The routine, the sense of purpose, was therapeutic. Slowly, I was reclaiming my identity, no longer just Daniel's wife or the mother of his children, but Laura, strong, independent, and resilient. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. Daniel's shadow loomed over our lives in unexpected ways. He tried to worm his way back into our lives, his messages oscillating between apologies and accusations. "You'll regret this, Laura. You and the kids need me," he texted one night, his words a stark reminder of the manipulation I had escaped. I didn't respond. Emily's advice echoed in my mind. "Don't let him back in, Laura. You've come too far." Her words were my anchor, keeping me steady in the face of Daniel's persistent attempts to unsettle me. The children adjusted to our new life with remarkable resilience. Their laughter filled Emily's home, turning it into a haven of hope and new beginnings. We had our moments of struggle, of course, but we faced them together as a family. As the weeks turned into months, I realized the divorce had not just been the end of a painful chapter, but the start of a new narrative. A narrative where I was the author, where my children and I were the main characters, charting a course towards a future filled with possibility. Emily and I would often sit on her porch after the kids were asleep, talking about life, dreams, and the future. In those quiet moments, I found a peace I hadn't known in years. "You've done it, Laura," Emily would say, her eyes shining with pride. "You've built a new life for yourself and the kids." And she was right. Against all odds, we had built something beautiful from the ashes of my broken marriage. We were no longer just surviving, we were thriving. Months had passed since the divorce, and life had settled into a new rhythm. However, the peace was abruptly shattered one evening by an unexpected call from Daniel. I hesitated as I saw his name flash on the screen. Taking a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself for what was to come. "What do you want, Daniel?" His voice was a mix of desperation and arrogance. "Laura, you need to come back. The kids need a father." I couldn't help but scoff. "They have been doing just fine without you." "You're turning them against me," he accused, his voice rising in anger. "No, Daniel, you did that all by yourself," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I've changed, Laura. I realize my mistakes now. Let's start over," he pleaded, but his words rang hollow. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. "Start over? After everything you've done? You're delusional, Daniel." There was a pause on the line, and when he spoke again, his tone had changed. "You'll regret this, Laura. You can't keep me away from my kids forever." I clenched my phone, feeling a mix of anger and determination. "Watch me, Daniel. I will do whatever it takes to protect them from you." The call ended with a click, leaving me shaken but resolute. I knew Daniel's threats were not to be taken lightly, but I was no longer the woman who had tolerated his neglect and abuse. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's attempts to worm his way back into our lives intensified. He tried to sway the children with gifts, to charm Emily with false apologies, but we stood firm. Then came the day when I received a letter from Daniel's lawyer, demanding visitation rights. It was a move I had anticipated, yet it filled me with dread. I met with my lawyer, my resolve unwavering. I won't let him near the kids. He's a toxic influence. "We'll fight this, Laura." my lawyer assured me. You have a strong case. The ensuing legal battle was draining, but I was fighting for something far more important than my own well-being. I was fighting for my children's future. As I sat in the courtroom listening to Daniel's lawyer paint him as a reformed man, a devoted father, I felt a surge of anger. He was playing the victim, twisting the narrative to suit his agenda. But the evidence was on my side. The years of neglect, the emotional trauma he had inflicted, spoke louder than his empty words. The judge's verdict was a vindication of all we had endured. Daniel's request for visitation was denied, with the judge citing concerns for the children's emotional well-being. As I walked out of the courtroom, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I had stood up to Daniel not just for myself, but for my children. I had shown them the strength of standing up to injustice, to fight for what is right. We were free from Daniel's shadow, finally. The road ahead would have its challenges, but we were ready to face them together. As I tucked the kids into bed that night, I knew we had turned a page. We were no longer bound by the chains of the past. We were moving forward, towards a future filled with hope and promise. And as I turned off the lights, a sense of peace settled over me. We were safe, we were together, and we were home.
Parents handed over the house I bought to my sister, so I stopped paying and it got sold. All right, so here's how it went down. Picture this. I'm 28, working my butt off in tech, living frugally, sharing an apartment with two roommates to save every penny. I wouldn't call my parents poor, but they've never been financially stable either. My folks have had their fair share of money struggles over the years, my dad especially, always switching jobs, sometimes laid off, trying different things to make ends meet. They've always been on the edge of being okay and just barely scraping by, if you know what I mean. Growing up, my sister Perry and I didn't exactly have the same treatment. She's 3 years younger, and man, she's always been the favorite. They let her do whatever she wanted, like she could never really do any wrong. She dropped out of high school, didn't have any plans to go to college, and pretty much floated around, doing odd jobs here and there. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one. My parents always had these big expectations for me, always hinting that I had to be the one to make it, because Perry, well, she wasn't going to. So they stretched their savings thin and took out loans to get me through tech school. They made it clear that this was my shot to make something of myself, and they were counting on me to pull through. They were upfront about how they sacrificed for me, how they could have spent that money on themselves or saved it for retirement, but instead, they invested in my future. And honestly, I didn't see anything wrong with it back then. I figured, yeah, they're just doing what any parent would do. They wanted me to succeed, right? So I kept my head down and worked hard, thinking, one day I'll pay them back and everything will be fine. After tech school, I landed a good job. It wasn't anything huge, but it was enough to start saving and paying back some of the student loans, which honestly was a weight off my shoulders. I'd send them some money here and there. Not too much because I was still setting up my own life, but enough to help out. Every time I sent something, Dad would remind me of the big sacrifices they'd made, hinting that there was still more they deserved. This was mostly through subtle comments like, "Don't forget where you came from," or "Remember who got you here." Real subtle, but I got the message. Then one night, I'm back home visiting for a few days. It's the first time I've been able to take some real time off, and we're sitting around the dinner table just talking. Out of nowhere, Dad brings up how they're still renting and how it's tough not to have a place to call their own. He talks about the rent hikes, the noisy neighbors, how tiring it is to move every few years when the lease is up. Then he looks straight at me and says, "We're just wondering when we can stop living on rent and finally settle down, you know?" I kind of laugh it off, thinking he's just venting, but then he goes, "You should think about buying us a place, son. You're doing well now. We've done our part to get you here." I'm sitting there, halfway through my meal, just blinking at him like, "Wait, what?" It hit me that they were dead serious. My mom chimes in, all supportive, saying, "It would really mean the world to us. A place we can call our own. You're the only one who can make that dream come true." In that moment, I felt trapped. They were right there, staring at me. and I didn't know what to say. On one hand, they did pay for my education and support me growing up, but on the other hand, buying a whole house for them? I'd just started my career, and here they were, talking like I should already have enough saved up to buy them a house on top of my own expenses. I tried to laugh it off, saying, "Dad, I'm barely paying rent myself. I can't afford a house for me yet, let alone for you guys." But they brushed it off with a smile and this knowing look, like they believed I'd figure it out eventually. Over the next few months, they kept dropping hints. Every phone call, every time I'd visit, there'd be a comment like, "It would be so nice to settle down somewhere," or "All we want is a small place, nothing big." And they'd follow it up with the usual reminders about sacrifices, how they didn't have a choice but to drain their savings for my school, how much they went without. I couldn't even argue with them. Everything they were saying was true. They had put everything into my future, and they did make sacrifices. But it started to feel like they weren't giving me a choice either, like they were pushing me into a corner. Guilt was their tool, and they wielded it well. Eventually, I caved. After years of saving and cutting back, I managed to scrape together enough for a down payment. I wanted to do it for them, partly because I felt I owed them, but also because I thought it had finally put an end to all the guilt trips. So, I bought them a house. Nothing crazy, just a simple place in a quiet neighborhood, but it was theirs. I was still sharing an apartment, but I thought, this is a good thing. They'll finally be happy, and maybe now they'll let me live my life. For the first few months, they were thrilled. Every call I got from them was about how great the house was, how comfortable they felt, how proud they were to finally have a place to call home. They showed it off to their friends and family, and for once, it seemed like the constant pressure was lifted. They had their house, and I was finally free to start focusing on my own goals. But as much as I thought it would create distance, it didn't. The house only got brought up more. Mom would mention how they were making it a true home and all the little upgrades they wanted, hinting that it'd be great if I could help out with those costs too. Dad would remind me of the mortgage payments, saying how we're all contributing to make this happen. It felt like every time I'd call, there was something new they wanted to discuss about the house. Still, I kept paying the mortgage, sending extra money whenever I could so I could close it off sooner. My life was just work, save, and repeat, but it felt like I was working towards something good. After all, I'd made their dream come true, right? I thought that was what mattered. But every time I'd look at my own savings, I'd get that sinking feeling. I was still just getting by, making all these sacrifices for a house I couldn't even live in, while they sat comfortably in what was supposed to be our accomplishment. So, now that my parents had the house, I figured things would finally chill. I thought they'd back off a bit, you know? I mean, I'd done something pretty huge for them, but the whole favorite child thing with my sister Perry just kept creeping back in, and it was like the more I helped, the more they leaned on me. I kept telling myself it was no big deal, but I was starting to feel more like a wallet than a son. Perry's always been treated differently, even though it's obvious to everyone but my parents. Growing up, she was never held to any standards. She dropped out of high school, got into stuff that didn't really pan out, and kind of drifted from job to job. But in their eyes, she was just finding herself, or exploring her options. They always found a way to paint her choices in some forgiving light, while I was told to stay focused, work hard, and basically make something out of myself so I could support the family. When I was in high school, it was pretty clear who they were betting on. I got drilled about my grades, career plans, and any move I made. Meanwhile, Perry could bring home F's on her report card, and Mom would tell her that not everyone's cut out for school. She could do no wrong, and I was the one expected to set the example. They saw me as their insurance, the one who would go out and make sure everyone was taken care of. Perry was like the family pet, except, she got everything handed to her. So here I am, paying for the house while they're treating it like it's her space too. I didn't think too much of it at first. After all, it was technically their house, so if she wanted to come over or stay for a weekend, it wasn't really my business. But then I'd get these weird comments from my parents about how Perry really loved the new place, or how she'd been staying there for days at a time. They even started talking about how great it would be for her to settle down nearby. That little hint just kept popping up every time I'd visit or call. Every single conversation with them started turning into some variation of, "It's so good for Perry to have stability nearby." They'd say things like, "Maybe she could live here while she figures things out." They'd say it in a casual way, like it was nothing big, just something to think about. But I'd worked my ass off to buy that house for them, not to fund a place for Perry to crash whenever she felt like it. A few months in, I realized that her little visits weren't just visits anymore. She was practically living there. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I asked Mom about it directly one day. She gave me this vague answer, something like, "Oh, well, she's just here helping us out around the house." Helping with what, though? Every time I'd visit, Perry was there, just lounging around like she owned the place. One weekend, I decided to pop by unannounced. I hadn't told them I was coming because, well, I wanted to see for myself what was really going on. I get there, and it's not my parents who open the door. It's Perry. She's wearing pajamas, looking super comfortable, like this was her place. She seemed surprised to see me and actually asked, "Oh, what are you doing here?" As if I was the one intruding. I remember just standing there, a little stunned, trying to process why she was acting like she'd been there for weeks. I go in, and the whole house is set up with her stuff everywhere. There were clothes and bags and makeup strewn around. It was like she'd moved in, no question about it. I ask her, "Where are Mom and Dad?" She shrugs, saying they're out shopping or something and won't be back for a while. I sit down trying to play it cool, but inside I'm fuming. We sit in this awkward silence for a few minutes, and I just can't take it anymore. I go, "So, are you staying here for a bit?" She just shrugs again, saying, "Well, it's a nice place. Mom and Dad don't mind me hanging out here." I wanted to tell her off, say something like, "Yeah, well, maybe I mind," but I knew that would blow up into something bigger. So instead, I just nodded, biting my tongue, trying not to lose it right there. When my parents came back, I brought it up casually, saying something like, "Hey, I didn't realize Perry was staying here." They just laughed it off, saying she needed a place to stay for a while because things weren't working out with her roommates. I knew exactly what that meant. She'd probably gotten kicked out or couldn't pay her part of the rent. But of course, my parents would never actually say that. To them, it was just another harmless little adjustment in her life. Nothing was ever her fault. That night, we all sat down for dinner, and the entire time, they kept praising her for helping them out around the house. I couldn't believe it. They were acting like she was some kind of hero for being there, while I'm the one actually paying for the place. Every time I tried to bring up something related to the house, they'd steer the conversation back to Perry, how good it was for her, how she was finally getting her feet on the ground, and how this was just what she needed to get on the right track. It was like I wasn't even part of the picture anymore. They were making this house about her, as if my sacrifices didn't exist. After that night, I couldn't shake this feeling that I'd been duped. I didn't sign up to buy a house for Perry. I bought it for them, thinking I'd be giving them security. But it started feeling more like I was financing Perry's new life. I left that visit feeling frustrated, like I'd walked into a trap I didn't even know was there. It was becoming clearer that my parents had a blind spot the size of a house when it came to Perry. I couldn't help but feel like I was being taken advantage of, and it was getting hard to ignore. The next time I talked to my parents, they dropped another bomb on me. They started talking about how settled Perry seemed to feel in the house and how great it would be if she had her own space. I tried to laugh it off, saying, "Well, she's got to find her own way eventually, right?" But they just looked at me with these blank stares, like I wasn't getting it. And I realized then that they had a different idea about what her own space meant. All right, so here's where things went completely off the rails. After that last visit where I'd walked in on Perry just lounging around the house, I figured she'd be moving out soon. Or at the very least, she'd help out if she was planning to stay longer. I thought maybe she was just crashing there temporarily, like we all do when we're going through something. But a couple of weeks later, my mom calls me up, all casual, and drops a bomb on me. They'd actually moved out. Yeah, you read that right. My parents moved out of the house I bought for them, and Perry had moved in full-time instead. I sat there, phone in hand, trying to process it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, I bought that house specifically for my parents, thinking it would give them the stability and peace of mind they deserved. And now, out of nowhere, they just handed it over to Perry. No heads up, no conversation, just a casual announcement like I'd have no problem with it. I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, "Why would you move out? This house was for you and Dad, not for Perry." My mom just laughed, brushing it off like it was no big deal. "Oh, honey, we needed a fresh start. Besides, Perry needs the house more than we do right now. She's trying to get her life together, and having a stable place to live will help her a lot." She said it so matter-of-factly, like it was the most logical thing in the world. "She's trying to get her life together," she explained, like that justified everything. "She needs stability, especially if she's going to have a family someday." I was just sitting there, stunned, trying to wrap my head around what she just said. Stability? What about the stability I'd been working toward? What about all the sacrifices I'd made to make sure my parents had a decent home to live in? And now, out of nowhere, Perry was just taking over, and they hadn't even bothered to ask if I was okay with it. Finally, I asked them flat out, "So, are you saying Perry's living there full time now? And what about the mortgage? Who's paying for that?" My mom's tone shifted, sounding almost defensive, like I was accusing her of something. "Well, honey, you're doing well for yourself now, aren't you? It shouldn't be a big deal for you to keep paying a bit longer. Besides, she's family." There it was, the "you're doing well" line again, as if my hard work and all the sacrifices I'd made meant they had free access to whatever I'd built for myself. I tried to keep my cool, but it was like a slap in the face. I said, "Mom, this isn't what we agreed on. I bought that house for you and Dad, not for Perry to live rent-free while I cover the bills." She sighed, sounding exasperated, like I was the one being unreasonable. "We thought you'd understand. She's struggling and she doesn't have the same opportunities as you. You've always been the responsible one, and we're just asking you to help a little longer." At that point, I was barely holding it together. Help a little longer? Mom, I'm paying for the entire thing. It's not a little help. I've been paying extra every month to get this paid off faster, thinking it was for your stability. Now you're telling me you just handed it over to Perry without even asking me? My dad chimed in then, trying to sound calm and reasonable, but he came off more patronizing than anything. "Son, we didn't think it'd be such a big deal. We know you're financially stable, and Perry could really use this. It's just until she gets back on her feet." "Gets back on her feet?" I said, my voice rising despite trying to keep it in check. "She's been getting back on her feet her entire life. When does it stop being my responsibility to fix everything for her?" They just sat there, looking at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Finally, my mom said, "Well, maybe we shouldn't have assumed you'd be so willing to help your own family." The way she said it, like I was the bad guy, just hit me hard. It was like no matter what I did, they'd always find a way to turn it on me. I got up to leave, saying, "Look, this needs to change. Either she pays her part, or you guys do, but I'm not just footing the bill for Perry to live for free in the house I'm sacrificing everything for." They didn't respond, just looked at each other like they were disappointed in me, as if I'd let them down somehow. Driving home, I felt more frustrated and betrayed than I ever had before. They'd pulled this move, blindsiding me with a decision that impacted my life in a huge way, and then they had the nerve to make me feel guilty for not wanting to just go along with it. It was like all my hard work and everything I'd done for them meant nothing. Back at my place, I tried to calm down, thinking maybe I was overreacting, that maybe I was being selfish for wanting a little say in how my money was being spent. But the more I thought about it, the more it sank in that I wasn't being unreasonable at all. I mean, who just hands over a house that someone else is paying for without even asking them? What kind of parents do that? And what kind of sister just moves in without offering to help out, without even considering that maybe this wasn't fair? I felt like I was at a crossroads. If I kept going along with this, what was next? Would I be expected to fund every little thing they decided to hand over to Perry just because I was doing well? Would I always be the backup plan, the one they could depend on whenever they needed money? I thought back to all the years I'd worked to get here, all the sacrifices I'd made. I'd spent my life trying to make them proud, working my way up so I could give them a better life. And now that I'd done it, it was like I was just a resource to them. Not a son with his own dreams, but a wallet. And Perry? She wasn't even remotely grateful. It was just expected that I'd step in and fix things for her whenever she needed it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep paying for everything without setting some boundaries, or this was never going to end. If they saw me as their financial safety net, they'd never stop taking, and I'd never be able to live my own life. So I made up my mind. I was going to have to set some hard limits, even if it hurt them, even if they didn't understand. Because at the end of the day, I'd spent too long sacrificing everything for a family that saw my success as theirs to spend, and I deserved better than that. After that last call, it was clear I had to make some tough decisions. The whole situation had gotten out of control, and if I didn't set some hard limits, they'd keep taking from me until I had nothing left. My parents had moved out without a word, turned my house into Perry's place, and had the nerve to use my extra payments to cover their rent. They didn't see a problem with any of it, and that told me they'd keep pushing until I put my foot down. I took a couple of days to think it through. I wanted to approach this calmly, not just come in guns blazing. The plan was simple. I'd tell them I wasn't going to keep sending extra payments, and if Perry wanted to live there, she needed to start contributing to the mortgage or move out. It was time for some real boundaries. So, I called my parents and told them we needed to talk face to face. They weren't thrilled, but agreed, and I headed over to their new place. The tension was thick when I arrived, and it was obvious they knew what this was about. We sat down, and I didn't waste any time getting to the point. Look, I started, keeping my voice as calm as I could. I found out from the bank that the extra money I've been sending hasn't been going toward the mortgage. I don't appreciate being kept in the dark about where my money's going. My dad tried to wave it off. It's not a big deal. We needed the extra to cover rent since we moved out for Perry. You're doing well, we didn't think you'd mind. That "you're doing well" line again. I was so sick of hearing it. They used it every time they wanted something from me, like the fact that I'd worked hard somehow made it my job to fix all their problems. I took a deep breath and replied, "But I do mind, Dad. I bought this house for you, not for Perry. And the extra was supposed to pay off the mortgage faster, not fund a second place for you. I can't keep doing this." My mom gave me that disappointed look she'd perfected over the years. "Honey, Perry needs stability. She doesn't have the same opportunities as you. We thought you'd want to help your sister." I was so frustrated I could feel my patience slipping. "Mom, I'm already helping. I bought the house, I've been paying the mortgage, and I even sent extra. But Perry's an adult. If she wants to live there, she needs to contribute. This isn't fair to me." Dad shook his head, looking annoyed. "You're being selfish. We've done so much for you. Isn't it time you gave a little back to the family?" I felt my temper rising, but I kept it together. I am giving back. I've been giving more than enough. But I have a right to set limits, and right now, the limit is that I'm only paying the minimum mortgage from now on. If Perry's staying there, she needs to pitch in, or she has to find somewhere else to live. They both looked at me, clearly unhappy, but I didn't back down. I'd rehearsed this in my head so many times that I knew exactly what I needed to say, and I wasn't going to let them guilt me into caving. "This isn't about not caring," I added. "It's about fairness. I worked hard to get here, and I deserve some respect for that. I'm happy to support you guys, but not like this." My mom sighed and tried one last time. "We thought you'd understand. Family takes care of each other." "Family also respects each other," I replied, feeling more firm than ever. "I've done everything I can to support you, but I have to draw the line somewhere. I need to focus on my own life too. If Perry wants to stay, she needs to help out. If not, then I'll figure something else out with the house." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. They weren't used to me talking like this, and I could see they didn't know how to react. My dad eventually muttered, "We'll talk to Perry." It was obvious he wasn't happy, but he realized I wasn't backing down this time. I left, feeling drained but also relieved. For once, I'd stood up for myself without feeling guilty about it. I didn't know what they'd do or what Perry would say, but at that point I didn't care. I'd done my part, more than my part, and it was time they started respecting that. Over the next few days, I heard nothing from them. No calls, no messages, just silence. Part of me wondered if I'd gone too far, but every time I replayed the conversation, I knew I'd done the right thing. I'd been bending over backward for years, and it was finally time to put my own needs first. Then, one afternoon, my mom called. Her voice was calm, almost resigned. She told me they'd talked to Perry, and she'd agreed to start contributing to the mortgage. Just a small amount, but it was something. She sounded disappointed, like she still couldn't believe I'd actually asked for it, but I didn't let it bother me. "That's good to hear," I said, keeping it short. I didn't want to drag this out or get into another guilt trip session. I was just relieved that for once, they'd actually respected a boundary I'd set. Hanging up, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was relieved, yes, but also sad. I never thought it had come to this, having to argue with my own parents just to get them to respect what I'd worked so hard for. But I knew it had to happen. If I didn't stand up for myself now, this would be my life forever, constantly giving, constantly being expected to cover everyone else's mistakes. In the weeks that followed, things were quieter. They didn't push as much, and there were no more sudden changes I wasn't told about. For once, I felt like I was actually living my life for myself, not just as a backup plan for everyone else. I won't say everything's fixed. I know they still see me as the responsible one they can lean on, but at least now I've drawn a line. And if they cross it, I won't hesitate to remind them of where that line stands. It took me years to get here, and I'm not going back. After that last talk, I knew it was time to walk away. I'd tried everything, reasoning with them, setting boundaries, even offering a compromise to keep things fair. But no matter what I did, it always ended up the same. They saw me as their safety net, not as their son who also had his own life and goals. So I made the decision I should have made a long time ago. I stopped paying the mortgage. I was prepared for the fallout. The calls started almost immediately. At first, it was my mom calling every day, sometimes multiple times a day, leaving these long-winded voicemails about family obligations and how disappointed they were in me. She'd remind me of all the things they'd done for me growing up, making it sound like I was some selfish jerk who'd abandoned his family. Then my dad joined in. His voicemails were sharper, more frustrated. He'd say things like, "We raised you to support your family. We thought you'd always be there for us." But to be honest, I was numb to it. For once, I didn't feel guilty. I'd given them everything I could, and they'd taken advantage of it. This wasn't my problem anymore. Eventually, when I kept ignoring their calls, they ran out of ways to reach me, but that didn't stop them. They started calling from different numbers, sometimes even borrowing friends' phones to try to catch me off guard. I'd see an unknown number pop up and hesitate, just in case it was important. But sure enough, it'd be another voicemail from my mom, going on about how family doesn't abandon each other, trying to guilt trip me right back into covering the mortgage. But this time, I wasn't having it. I blocked every number I could recognize, and when new ones popped up, I blocked those too. I think what hit me the hardest was realizing that, for them, this was normal. To them, family meant I'd endlessly give, no questions asked. It never crossed their minds that I might have my own life, my own dreams. They couldn't see me as anything other than a bank account with a voice on the other end of the line. With no one covering the mortgage, things. Fiance banned my little daughter from our wedding ceremony because she has no role, but his 4 kids are included. So we're in the middle of planning this big wedding. I'm not going to lie, it's kind of overwhelming, but also exciting, you know? Adam and I have been together for a while, and blending our families has been a wild ride. He's got 4 kids from his 2 previous relationships, twin girls who are 7, another daughter who's a preteen, and his youngest, a 5-year-old son. I've got my little girl, who's 5 and just started kindergarten. So, yeah, we've got a lot of kids in the mix. Honestly, until now, things had been going pretty smoothly with the kids. Adam's always been big on treating everyone equally, which is a huge deal for me. When you're blending families, that's what you hope for, right? So, we've been managing this whole one big happy family thing pretty well until the wedding planning kicks off. We're going through all the usual stuff like venues, food, colors, whatever, and we finally get to talking about roles for the kids. Adam's super excited about having his son be the ring bearer, and he's already picked his 3 daughters as the flower girls. When he first mentions it, I'm like, okay, that sounds cute. But then it hits me. My daughter's not included. Now I get it. Adam's got more kids, and maybe he just hadn't thought about it. But still, I want my daughter to be a part of the wedding too. She's my kid, and it would mean the world to her to be included in some way. So I bring it up casually like, hey, wouldn't it be nice if my daughter could be one of the flower girls too? Adam doesn't even think about it, just straight up says, no. At first, I think I must have misheard him, like, why would he just say no? So I try again just to make sure, and he repeats, no, 3's enough. I don't get it. We're talking about our wedding, and I'm asking for my kid to be a part of it, just like his kids are. It's not like I'm asking to rearrange everything or kick his kids out of the wedding or anything. I just want to add one more flower girl. So I ask him, why not? It's not that big a deal, right? And he just shrugs and says, it wouldn't work. That's it. No explanation, no discussion, just, it wouldn't work. I'm trying to keep calm because I don't want this to turn into an argument, especially since we're still in the middle of planning everything else. But I feel like he's brushing me off over something that should be an easy yes. The thing is, my daughter is at that age where she's all about princesses and dressing up. You know, like if she sees a fluffy dress or a tiara, she's obsessed. So being a flower girl would be a huge deal for her. And it's not just for her, it's for me too. I want her to feel like she's part of this big day, especially since she's going to be stepping into this blended family. I try to explain this to Adam, but he's just sitting there giving me this blank look. I can see he's getting annoyed, but I keep pushing a little because it's important to me. I tell him that including her is a small thing that would make a big difference, but he just sighs and says, you're making this a big deal over nothing. All right, now I'm starting to get frustrated. It's like he's not even hearing me. I get that he's got more kids, and I totally respect that his kids are a big part of his life, but it's not like I'm asking for the world here. I'm just asking for a spot for my daughter, one of the flower girls. I mean, if this was any other event, he'd be cool with it, but for some reason, he's shutting me down hard on this. By this point, I'm starting to feel a little hurt. It's like he's making it a his kids versus my kid thing, which isn't what I'm going for at all. I'm not even trying to make it complicated. I just want to feel like my daughter matters as much as his kids do on this day that's supposed to be about us. But he's acting like I'm trying to start some family drama. So I decide to back off for now. I mean, maybe he's just stressed with all the planning, or maybe he's got some reason he doesn't want to explain right now. But in the back of my mind, I can't shake the feeling that he's being weirdly stubborn about this, and it's not sitting right with me. I try telling myself, it's just a flower girl spot, it's not the end of the world, but honestly, it's more than that to me. This is about my daughter feeling like she belongs in this new family. It's about her looking back on the wedding photos one day and feeling like she was a part of it. I don't want her to feel like she was on the sidelines at her mom's wedding just because she didn't happen to have the same dad as the other kids. So yeah, I'm stuck in this weird situation where something that should be simple is suddenly turning into a huge question mark. I'm trying not to let it spoil the excitement of the wedding planning, but every time I look at those flower girl dresses online, I just feel a little off. It's like I'm excited for the wedding, but there's this nagging feeling in the back of my mind like, why isn't this a no-brainer for him? I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it, but at the end of the day, I can't help but feel like this should have been an easy yes. The fact that it's not just has me second-guessing things a little, and I hate that. So, a few days go by after that whole awkward conversation with Adam about the flower girls. I decide to let it go for now, figuring maybe he just needs time to come around. But as luck would have it, that's when my daughter catches wind of the flower girl plans. She overhears the twins talking about being flower girls, and her face just lights up. I mean, she's a kid. Hearing about dresses and petals and getting to walk down an aisle? She's all in. She turns to me with this huge grin and says, "Mom, I want to be a flower girl too." Just the way she says it, like it's the most obvious thing in the world, makes my heart both happy and kinda, well, a little sad, honestly, because I know how that conversation went with Adam. Now, I could have just tried to distract her or pretend like it's not a big deal, but this isn't something she's going to forget in 2 minutes. So I decide to try bringing it up with Adam again, thinking maybe this time he'll see how much it means to her, and to me, if I'm being honest. Later that evening, I sit him down. I tell him my daughter heard the twins talking and now she's really excited about being a flower girl too. And I'm hoping this will be the thing that finally clicks with him. Like, come on, seeing a little kid's excitement should melt anyone's heart, right? But nope, he just sighs and says, "Look, 3 flower girls are enough. We don't need more." I tell him she's really looking forward to it and that it would mean a lot, and he just gives me this look like I'm being pushy. I'm trying to keep my patience here because I know how sensitive weddings can be, and I don't want to start another argument. But seriously, I can't wrap my head around why he's so against it. I tell him again that it's a small thing that would make her really happy, and he just cuts me off saying, "It wouldn't work." I'm starting to see red at this point, but I try one last angle. I tell him that adding her isn't taking anything away from his kids, and that all the girls can do it together. No problem. But he just snaps at me saying, "It's not a big deal. You're making this way too serious." I feel like I just hit a wall. It's like he's not even considering how important this is to me or to her. It's like he's already decided she doesn't get to be a part of it no matter what. And then he drops this line on me, something like, "I thought we were past this my kid, your kid stuff." Excuse me? My kid, your kid? I'm literally sitting here trying to make my daughter feel like part of the family. Isn't that the whole point of us getting married? It's like he's turning it around on me, making me out to be the one who's causing division. I'm so thrown off by his attitude that I can't even process what he's saying for a minute. I manage to keep my cool enough to tell him, "She just wants to be part of this, Adam. It's not like she's asking for the world." But he just shakes his head, acting like I'm being unreasonable for even bringing it up. He says something about how I'm making this a hill to die on and acting immature. The way he says it, like I'm this big drama queen over something so silly, just cuts. I never expected him to react like this, and I certainly didn't think he'd make me feel guilty for standing up for my kid, so I just tell him, fine, I won't push it. But inside, I'm crushed. It feels like my daughter and I are just not as important as I thought we were. Later that night, my daughter asks me if she's going to get to be a flower girl, and I feel this lump in my throat. How am I supposed to tell her that her excitement doesn't matter, that she doesn't get to be included? So, I try to keep it simple. I tell her we're still working on the details, that nothing's set in stone yet, and she kind of nods, looking a bit disappointed. It breaks my heart. She's a little kid who just wants to feel special, and I feel like I'm failing her by not being able to make that happen. The twins, of course, are still all excited and talking about it nonstop, and every time they bring it up, I can see my daughter's face fall a little. She doesn't complain, but I can tell she's feeling left out, and that just eats at me. Over the next few days, I keep thinking about what happened, replaying it in my head. I wonder if I could have said something differently, tried harder to make him see my side, but honestly, it feels like he's already decided. And it feels like there's something deeper there, something he's not telling me. It's like he's got this line in his head, this unspoken rule that his kids are official, and my daughter's just there. It's hard not to feel bitter about it. I mean, we're supposed to be building a life together, right? A whole family. I want my daughter to feel like she belongs here, like she's not just tagging along in someone else's family. And Adam, not wanting to include her in something as special as the wedding, the one day that's supposed to be about us all coming together, makes me question how things are really going to work once the honeymoon phase is over. But I tell myself it's just a minor setback, that maybe he's just stressed with the wedding planning, or maybe he's nervous and doesn't want things to get too complicated. So I try to push down those nagging doubts and focus on the other parts of the wedding that we're both excited about. Still, there's this knot in my stomach every time my daughter brings it up or looks at me with those big, hopeful eyes. I hate that I don't have a real answer for her, and I hate even more that Adam doesn't seem to care. It's a lousy feeling, honestly. I thought he'd see how much it mattered to me, to us as a family. But now I'm not so sure we're on the same page. After a few more days of awkward tension and no real resolution about the flower girl issue, I decide I can't keep quiet about it anymore. I've been bottling up my frustration, trying to convince myself that maybe I'm overthinking or that maybe I just need to let it go. But every time I see my daughter's face drop a little, whenever the twins talk about being flower girls, I feel a pang of guilt. I shouldn't have to explain to her why she's not allowed to be a part of her own mom's wedding. So one night, after the kids are in bed, I bring it up with Adam again. I try to approach it calmly, like, look, I know you're set on the three girls, but I really think we should find a way to include my daughter too. Before I even get the whole sentence out, he lets out this big sigh, rolling his eyes, and says, are we seriously still talking about this? That right there just lights a fuse in me. The eye roll, the tone, like I'm this annoying person for even caring about my kid's feelings. I try to stay calm and tell him that yes, I still think it's important, especially since my daughter is now looking forward to it. He cuts me off with, it's just not necessary, all right? Why can't you let it go? Let it go? I feel myself getting heated, but I try to explain myself. I tell him it's not just about the wedding. It's about her feeling like she's part of the family. This is supposed to be a day where we're all coming together, and leaving her out just doesn't sit right with me. But instead of understanding, he just snaps back with, you're making this way bigger than it needs to be. They're just kids. They won't remember who was or wasn't a flower girl. Now I'm just shocked. I'm standing there trying to explain why this matters to me, and he's acting like I'm asking for the moon. I say, it's a big deal to me, and it's a big deal to her. I don't understand why you're so against it. And that's when he says it, the line that makes everything crystal clear. Maybe it's a big deal to you, but I think you're making it my kid versus your kid thing, and I don't appreciate that. I'm taken aback. My kid versus your kid? I didn't even know how to respond. I'm literally trying to include my daughter, not separate her. I tell him that I want her to feel like she belongs, like she's part of this family. And he just gives me this cold stare and says, you're being toxic, you know that? It's this mentality that's creating problems. Creating problems? I feel like I'm in the twilight zone. I'm trying to figure out why he thinks that me asking for my daughter to be part of our wedding is somehow causing a divide. I tell him that, if anything, leaving her out is what's making things feel split. But he's not even listening. He just crosses his arms, standing there with this look of frustration, like I'm exhausting him. You know what? I say, finally feeling fed up. I don't understand why you're acting like this is some massive request. She just wants to be included. Why can't you get that? And then he laughs. Actually laughs. Because it's ridiculous, he says. It's ridiculous that you're so hung up on something as small as this. I'm treating everyone equally, but you're the one making it a big deal. I can't believe what I'm hearing. I tell him, it's not treating everyone equally if my daughter doesn't get to participate. This is our wedding. Shouldn't she feel like she's part of it too? But he just waves me off, saying I'm blowing things out of proportion. Why are you choosing this hill to die on? He snaps, like he's completely over it. It's not fair to keep pushing and pushing just because you want her to have some special role. I'm not budging on this. Hearing that from him, I'm not budging. Just hits me in a way I didn't expect. It's like he's drawing a line in the sand over something I thought was a given. I thought we were a team. I thought he'd understand that including my daughter was just as important as including his kids. But he's looking at me like I'm the one who's being unreasonable. At this point, I'm hurt and honestly just mad. I tell him, if this is how you handle something so small, what's it going to be like when there's a bigger issue? How can I trust you to have my back if you're not willing to consider something that matters to me? He scoffs, crossing his arms even tighter. Oh, don't make this into some grand thing about trust. This is about you not respecting my decisions. Now I'm the one rolling my eyes. I tell him it's not just his decision to make. This is our wedding, our family, and my daughter deserves to be included in something this important. But he's already checked out of the conversation. He shakes his head and says, "You're just being petty." That word, petty, stings more than I thought it would. I feel like he's dismissing me and everything I'm saying, like my feelings and my daughter's feelings don't matter. So I tell him, if caring about my daughter's place in our family is petty, then maybe I am. But I'm not going to just sit back and let her feel left out. He just shakes his head like he's disappointed and says, "I can't believe you're making this into such a drama." I don't even know what to say anymore. I'm standing there, stunned, while he walks off like he's done with the conversation. I feel like I'm alone in this, fighting for something that shouldn't even be a fight. I thought planning this wedding would bring us closer, make us stronger as a family, but now all I feel is this growing distance between us, and it's honestly terrifying. As I stand there in the empty room, I realize this argument isn't just about a flower girl spot anymore. It's about how he sees me, how he sees my daughter, and maybe even how he sees our future. And for the first time, I start to wonder if maybe this isn't what I signed up for after all. After that fight, I start questioning everything. You know when you replay conversations in your head, trying to figure out if you're the one who missed something? Well, that's been me for the past few days. I keep going back to all the things Adam said, and honestly, it's making my stomach turn. It's not just the flower girl thing anymore. Sure, that's what started it, but now I'm thinking about the bigger picture. The way he brushed off my feelings, the way he laughed like I was being ridiculous for standing up for my kid, and that whole "your kid versus my kids" line he threw at me. It felt like a slap in the face. I keep wondering if he's reacting this way over something as small as adding one more flower girl, what's it going to be like when we hit actual problems? Blending families isn't easy, and we both knew that going into this. I figured we'd face challenges, but I thought we'd tackle them together. Now, though, I feel like I'm starting to see a side of him I didn't notice before. Or maybe I just didn't want to see it. Over the next few days, every little thing starts standing out to me. Like when we're all hanging out with the kids, he's so quick to jump in and play with his kids, joke around, make them feel special. And don't get me wrong, that's great. I love that he's a good dad to them. But then I notice he's just distant with my daughter. Maybe I was blind to it before, but now it's all I can see. For example, his daughters will ask him something, even something silly like, "Can you help me with my doll's hair?" And he'll go all in, doing whatever they need, laughing, making them feel seen. My daughter will ask him a similar thing, and it's like he barely hears her. Just a quick, "Yeah, yeah," and maybe a distracted pat on the head before he goes back to whatever he was doing. I've tried to ignore it, thinking I'm reading too much into it, but now that I'm looking, it's pretty clear. And here's the thing. My daughter's starting to notice too. She hasn't said anything outright, but I can tell. She looks a little sad when he doesn't pay attention to her, or when he laughs extra loud at something one of his kids says but barely acknowledges her. She's only 5, but kids aren't dumb. They know when they're being left out. And as her mom, it just guts me. I keep trying to remind myself that he's stressed with wedding planning, that maybe he's just tired or preoccupied. But then I remember his words. I'm not budging on this, like his decision was final, no room for compromise or understanding. And that hurts. Because I thought marriage was supposed to be about finding common ground, about supporting each other. But here I am, feeling like I'm fighting this battle on my own and he's on the other side. I think back to how things were when we first got together. He was charming, caring, the kind of guy who made me believe in this whole blended family dream. He'd say things like, "Our family will be one big team," or "I'll always treat your daughter like my own." And I believed him because that's what I wanted for her. A dad who'd love her, make her feel safe and valued. But now I'm starting to think that was just talk. The other day, we were at the park with all the kids, and I watched him playing with his son, lifting him up, spinning him around, making him laugh. Meanwhile, my daughter was off to the side, playing in the sand by herself. She looked over a few times, probably hoping he'd invite her in, maybe include her too, but he didn't even look her way. And that's when it hit me. This isn't just about the flower girl thing. This is about her feeling like part of his family, and right now, she's not. I try to bring it up again, one more time, thinking maybe if I approach it gently, he'll understand where I'm coming from. But as soon as I start, he just shuts it down. He's got this tone like he's annoyed with me, like I'm making his life difficult by even suggesting that my daughter should feel included. He tells me, "You're reading too much into it, and can we please move on?" Like I'm the one being irrational. And that's when I start to seriously wonder if this is what I want. Is this the guy I'm supposed to spend the rest of my life with? Someone who brushes off my concerns, laughs when I try to stand up for my kid, and refuses to even consider compromising? I wanted this wedding to be the start of something beautiful for us, a new chapter where we all come together as one family. But instead, it's feeling more like a warning sign. It's not an easy thing to admit to myself, but I can't ignore the feeling in my gut anymore. I want a partner who'll stand by me, who'll make my daughter feel like she belongs just as much as his kids do. But every conversation we have about this makes me feel like that's never going to happen with him. I start thinking about the future. Holidays, birthdays, big family events. Will it always be his kids and my kid? Am I signing my daughter and myself up for a life where she's always left on the sidelines, where her place in the family is always second to his kids? And honestly, I don't want that for her. I don't want her growing up feeling like she's somehow less than just because her mom didn't marry her dad. She deserves to feel loved, included, and valued. And right now, I don't think Adam can give her that. So yeah, I've been having some major second thoughts and it's tearing me up inside. Because I love him, I do, but I can't ignore what's right in front of me. And I can't keep hoping he'll change when every sign is pointing to the fact that he won't. For now, I'm just taking things day by day, trying to figure out what's best for my daughter and me. But the more I think about it, the more I feel like maybe this isn't the happily ever after I thought it would be. So here I am, days away from what's supposed to be my wedding, and I'm realizing that maybe, just maybe, this isn't what I thought it would be. It's honestly heartbreaking because I didn't get this far to throw it all away. I've invested my heart, my time, my dreams of what a family could be. But then again, I didn't sign up for a life where my daughter would be treated like she's on the sidelines, or where every little thing about her inclusion would turn into a fight. A few nights ago, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, just turning everything over in my head. I kept asking myself, can I really do this? Can I marry someone who doesn't seem to care how this affects my daughter? And I realized that if I'm having these questions now, that's a massive red flag. I mean, yeah, wedding jitters are normal, but this isn't about nerves. This is about my kid, my little girl who's looking up to me to make choices that keep her safe and happy. The next morning, I wake up with this heavy feeling in my chest. Adam's already up, in the kitchen making coffee like it's any other day. I stand there just watching him for a second, wondering if he's even feeling the same doubt that I am. But the truth is, he doesn't seem bothered. He's just going about his day, like everything's fine, like we didn't have some pretty intense arguments about this whole flower girl situation, or like he didn't tell me flat out that my feelings were petty and ridiculous. I realize I can't keep this all bottled up anymore. I have to get it out, or it's going to eat me alive. So I take a deep breath and sit down across from him at the table. I don't even know where to start, so I just say, we need to talk. He looks up, surprised. About what? He asks, like he doesn't already know. So, I lay it out. I tell him I've been having second thoughts. I tell him that this whole thing with my daughter, the way he's been so against including her, has made me question if this is really the right choice. I say that it's not just about a flower girl role, it's about how he sees us as a family, and right now, it feels like he's not willing to meet me halfway. He sits there for a minute, and I can see his jaw tighten. I can't believe you're letting this ruin everything, he says finally, and his tone's sharp like he's annoyed with me. We're so close to the wedding, and you're just… what? Second-guessing everything because of one little thing? That phrase, one little thing, just about sets me off. I tell him that it's not one little thing to me or to my daughter. I explain, probably for the 100th time, that this is about making her feel like she's part of this family, like she's valued and included. But he just shakes his head, like I'm missing the point. Look, he says, leaning back in his chair, I'm not saying I don't care about your daughter, but I already made decisions for this wedding, and I don't feel like I should have to change everything just because she wants to be a flower girl. There it is, the final nail in the coffin. It's not about my daughter, it's about his decisions, his way, his unwillingness to even consider bending for her or for me. I realize that this is how it'll be every time there's something important to me that he doesn't want to deal with. He'll shut it down, brush it off, or make me feel like I'm asking for the world when really, all I want is a place for my daughter. At this point, I feel this weird calm come over me. It's like everything I need to know is right in front of me. I don't want to keep arguing or begging him to understand where I'm coming from. If he doesn't get it now, he's never going to get it. I look at him and say, Adam, if we can't agree on something as simple as making my daughter feel included, How are we going to handle the big stuff? How can I marry you, knowing this is how it'll always be? He just looks at me like he's at a loss for words, but not in a way that shows he understands. More like he's fed up with me, like I'm wasting his time. He doesn't say anything for a moment, then finally just mutters, I can't believe you're throwing this all away over one little thing. Hearing him say that again, I feel my heart break a little. But I know I'm making the right decision. If he can't see why this matters to me, why it matters for my daughter, then what's the point of going through with this wedding? I stand up, my hands shaking a little, and I tell him, I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing what's best for my daughter and me. And then I walk away. Packing up my things and telling my daughter that we're not going to be living here anymore is probably the hardest part. She doesn't fully understand, but she asks me, is Adam still going to be my daddy? And that question just about tears me in half. I tell her, no, sweetie, but we're going to be okay. She's young, so I know she'll be all right, and I know I'm making the right choice. But it doesn't make it hurt any less. Walking away from a relationship is always hard, but it's harder when you had all these hopes built up around it. Hopes for a happy family, for a fresh start, for a real partnership. The thing is, deep down, I know that I can't settle for someone who doesn't see me or my daughter as a priority. We both deserve more than that. And if Adam can't handle something as small as making my daughter feel included in a simple wedding role, then what else is he going to shut us out of? As I close the door behind me, I feel a strange mix of relief and sadness. Part of me still wishes things could have been different, that he could have seen what I was asking for as something small but important. But I also know that wishing for someone to change isn't the same as them actually changing. And right now, my daughter and I need someone who's all in, not someone who's only half there. So yeah, that's where I ended up, choosing my daughter over a man who couldn't see her worth. I don't know what's next for us, but at least I know I made the right decision. Update. It's been about a week since I called off the wedding. I've been trying to settle back into some kind of normal, mostly focusing on my daughter and keeping my mind off everything that went down with Adam. But then, just as I'm starting to feel like I can breathe again, he shows up at my place. I open the door, and there he is, looking all serious, like he's got something important to say. My heart's pounding because I honestly don't know what to expect. Part of me wants to slam the door in his face, but the other part of me, well, I guess I still want to believe he can change, even after everything. So I let him in, telling myself I'll give him a chance to talk, to explain himself. We sit down, and he starts off with this big sigh, like he's carrying the weight of the world. He says, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realized maybe I was a little too harsh. He says he misses us and regrets the way things ended, and for a second, I feel this tiny spark of hope. Maybe he's finally seeing things from my perspective, but then he starts adding these little conditions, turning the apology into a list of things he'd want me to change. He says stuff like, I just don't want you to keep pushing these issues about your daughter. It's exhausting to feel like everything has to revolve around her. He actually says that. Right there, I feel my heart sink. I tell him, she's my daughter, Adam. She's 5. Of course, she's going to be a priority. He just nods, doing that sighing thing again, like I'm being difficult. Then he goes, I get that, but you have to meet me halfway here. You have to stop bringing up all these issues about her feeling included in every little thing. It just makes things more complicated than they need to be. I'm sitting there, stunned, and trying to process what he's saying. He's apologizing, but only if I'm willing to agree to not push for my daughter anymore. He says things like, I want us to be happy together, but you need to understand that we can't keep revisiting this stuff every time she feels left out. At this point, I'm getting pretty fed up, but I try one more time to get through to him. I say, Adam, it wasn't just little stuff to me. This was about making her feel like she's part of our family. I want us to be a real team, not just me and her on one side and you and your kids on the other. He just looks at me like he's waiting for me to finish my speech. And then he says, see, this is what I mean. You're too focused on making everything perfect for her, like it has to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be so extreme. Just let things happen naturally. Let things happen naturally? I repeat, trying not to raise my voice. So naturally she's excluded? Naturally she just takes a back seat to your kids. Adam shifts in his seat, clearly annoyed now, and he says, it's not about her being excluded. It's about you not needing to control everything. Just let her be part of things when it works, but stop trying to force it. At that point, I feel this weight settle in my chest. I realize he's never going to see her as part of his family, not in the way that matters. He's so focused on making sure his kids stay comfortable that he can't even consider what it would mean for my daughter to feel like she belongs too. He goes on saying, I love you, but if we're going to make this work, you have to let go of some of this control. I can't have you questioning me every time I make a decision about my kids. There it is, plain as day. He's saying he wants things to go back to how they were, but only if I agree to back off when it comes to my daughter. He's not even trying to understand where I'm coming from. He just wants me to fall in line, to ignore the things that hurt, and accept that my daughter will always be a little bit less in his eyes. I take a deep breath, and I finally tell him, Adam, if that's what you think a family is, then I don't think I can be part of it. He looks at me surprised, like he wasn't expecting me to actually say no. What are you saying? He asks, his voice softer, almost like he's worried I might actually walk away. So I tell him, as clearly as I can, I'm saying I'm done. I can't marry you if this is how it's going to be. I can't be with someone who doesn't see my daughter as part of his family. He tries to argue, saying I'm throwing everything away over one issue, but I just shake my head. I tell him it's not one issue, Adam. It's the fact that you see her as an extra, as something you're dealing with, instead of someone you want to include. He keeps trying to convince me, saying he didn't mean it that way and that I'm overreacting. But by now I'm done listening. I've spent too much time hoping he'd come around, hoping he'd understand what it means to truly blend families. And now it's clear that he just doesn't. Finally, I get up, open the door, and tell him, I think it's best if we don't see each other anymore. I need to focus on what's best for my daughter, and that's clearly not going to happen here. He stands there for a moment, looking like he's trying to come up with something to say, but he doesn't. He just looks at me, shakes his head slightly, and walks out the door. I close it behind him, feeling this weird mix of sadness and relief. I loved him, and part of me still does, but I can't love someone who doesn't love my daughter the way she deserves. As I lock the door, I feel a sense of peace settle over me. It's not going to be easy moving forward, but at least I know I made the right decision for my daughter and me. She deserves a family that makes her feel included and valued, and if I have to create that on my own, then so be it.